Hello and welcome back. I'm 3 bots in a trench coat and I am extremely mad. Wizards did not post the Saturday Modern Challenge standings on their website. Normally they post all the challenges for the weekend at the same time. Saturdays just wasn't there. Nobody knows what happened. Suspected it's just lost to the ether. So this video might be the only record we have of my second place finish with green-white Hardened Scales. A little bit sad, but I guess I'll just have to top 8 again next week. So this is the deck. We are currently 5-0 in the challenge, and this is going to be the dramatic final video of the challenge where I finally break my losing streak and break my winning streak and lose to the great Sokos 13 on Grixis Shadow in the finals. But we've got a lot of Magic to play until then. So let's get into the replays. Let's see, we left off at round 5 last time. So let's start with round 6, game 1. We are 5-0 with green-white Hardened Scales. And hopefully the recording will go a little more smoothly this time since I had that warm-up last time. We are on the play up against Gigantha. Don't know what that means. Maybe it's mono green Tron. Tron's allowed to play Gigantha, right? This seems like a great hand. We've got Sentinel, Stirrings, Ozolith, and Saga. Definitely going to be keeping this. We're going to lead on the Sentinel, I believe. And our opponent starts off with a tapped indestructible artifact land. So I guess they're playing Gigantha in Affinity. We're going to follow it up with the Ozolith and I think another Esper Sentinel here. Since we have nothing to trigger our Hardened Scales for now, the more Esper Sentinels the better. And our opponent is actually going to let us draw 2 cards off of a Welding Jar. So these Esper Sentinels paying off already. They've got a lot of artifacts in play and a Saga that's about to start making some very large construct tokens to go with that Shadowspear and their Welding Jar. So this is actually a pretty precarious spot for us. But we do find a Walking Ballista. That's going to help pare down the number of artifacts they have on their board. And we're just going to play a Welding Jar and an Hardened Scales in preparation for getting this Walking Ballista down. We draw Arcbound Worker and decide to get Zabaz with our Urza Saga. We can't activate its red ability yet, but that is going to help us get more counters on this Ballista if we find a way to remove it from the battlefield. And obviously it pairs well with the Ozolith. We decide not to attack here. Opponent makes a construct as expected, makes another construct, and decides to get Springleaf Drum off of their Urza Saga. They play another Urza Saga and equip their Shadowspear. So this is a pretty dangerous attack here. We do get to block with our modular creatures though, which is going to allow us to put a ton of counters on the Walking Ballista and the Ozolith, especially in combination with Hardened Scales. However, those constructs are quite beefy, and they are going to take a lot of counters off of our Ballista in order to kill them, and Shadowspear is gaining our opponent some life. However, they do decide to chump block with their Welding Jar, and we have to spend a counter on the Ballista in order to trigger the Regenerate. Although I guess there's actually no value in triggering the Regenerate. No, we don't. The Regenerate already triggered. We spent the counter to kill the Memnite and shrink their construct tokens. They get in with both constructs, and we decide to spend all of our Ballista counters to kill the lifelinking one. In response to the last activation, they make a construct growing their other construct, so we have to spend 9 counters off of our 11/11 Ballista. And we do get to chump block here with a Welding Jar. opponent has an Esper Sentinel of their own, and we get to put another 2 counters on this Walking Ballista. Hangarback Walker is a decent chump blocker here. But we are in a pretty dire situation. Our opponent is putting a lot of artifacts in play, and Cranial Plating is going to be really deadly here. They do have the mana to equip it. We get to draw 1 card off of Esper Sentinel, but with this giant trampling construct, we're going to have a very hard time surviving here. In fact, that's a 23 power trampler. We're at 15 life, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9 toughness in play. So if we chump block their other construct token, we are exactly dead here. See if you can figure out the line. But turns out the line involves pinging their Esper Sentinel with Ballista. I love this play here because it shrinks the construct by 2 power due to the construct's ability and the Cranial Plating's ability. But it also shrinks our blockers by 1 toughness. And if you do the math, you'll find that we are now 1 +1/+1 counter short of lethal with our Inkmoth Nexus here in combination with the Ozolith. So we are going to survive at 1 life, but the problem now is that we can't kill our opponent on the crackback. We need to draw some way to pump our Inkmoth Nexus by 1 power. And that could be an untapped land to activate Pendelhaven, or it could be an Arcbound Ravager. And Arcbound Ravager is going to allow us to win this game, even though we were way behind using Inkmoth Nexus and the Ozolith. So I think that's pretty cool. Pretty close game there. We are up a game in round 6 against Affinity. Our sideboard plan is going to be all of the removal spells. That's 2 Path to Exile, 3 Prismatic Ending, and 2 Nature's Claim, and also 1 Pithing Needle, and also the Shadowspear to help with the grind. And we're boarding out all of the Esper Sentinels, all of the Ancient Stirrings, and 1 Welding Jar. Our opponent is going to get to be on the play here, and we do keep 7. This opener has a Nature's Claim and a Hangarback Walker and an Urza Saga, which is not bad. Hopefully we can get some good value off of this Nature's Claim, but it's not a very explosive opening hand. Arcbound Ravager is going to go a long way to making this hand good, and we do decide to kill their Springleaf Drum with the Nature's Claim here. Oh, we're auto-playing again. Killing the Springleaf Drum is a bit of a risky play since they might end up having an Urza Saga or some other impactful play, but we're trying to cut them off on mana here so that they don't get too explosive of a start. Turns out it doesn't end up paying off. They end up having Dispatch to exile our Hangarback Walker and plenty of mana, but actually not much threats. So we would have preferred to save this Nature's Claim to kill their threats. They put Gigantha in hand, and we make a construct off of our Urza Saga, make another one at end step, and decide to get a Shadowspear in an attempt to race. The problem with getting Shadowspear here is that our opponent's Urza Saga is going to be making much bigger construct tokens than our 2 constructs here. So this Shadowspear is going to become useless very quickly, and I think actually a Zabaz or an Ozolith would have been better here in order to make better use out of this Arcbound Ravager, because that's the one thing we have that they don't. And look at this, 2 11/11 construct tokens with a Shadowspear. Affinity is just busted. We are going to take a hit from a 12/12 lifelink Shadowspear, and we do draw Zabaz, but we don't quite have enough artifacts in play in order to kill them with Inkmoth Nexus here, and I think our opponent is going to be able to just Alpha Strike us to death. Especially after we have to chump block with our construct token. We're just not going to have enough artifacts in play in order to kill with Inkmoth Nexus. It is a pretty close game, but we're just not going to be able to beat these 2 9/9 construct tokens. After blocking with the Ravager, we do end up with a 5/5 Inkmoth in play, but we're just dead to what our opponent has on board, and we won't be able to stay alive for 2 turns in order to hit them twice with this Inkmoth Nexus. They have Dispatch to kill our Inkmoth. Maybe we could have lived with the lifelink from this Shadowspear, but that Dispatch is going to seal the deal. Wow, those constructs are just so big. We do survive at 1 life, but we have to chump block with Lurrus, and we draw land for the turn, so that's going to be the game. Our opponent is very short on time. This game ended up going a long time. So, and we're on the play for game 3, so it seems unlikely that our opponent is going to be able to kill us here, even in, especially in 3.5 minutes or less. And our opening hand has a Nature's Claim to further slow them down, plus an Urza Saga. So even if we don't end up winning here, it seems likely that we're going to win on time, which never feels good, but it's better than losing, right? And it looks like our opponent just has a very slow hand. We have enough to kill them with Inkmoth Nexus and Arcbound Ravager next turn with these 2 Hardened Scales, and we get to Nature's Claim their Urza Saga. So it seems like there's not going to be anything our opponent can do here. Bit of an anticlimactic finish to what has been a very swingy and dramatic Affinity versus Hardened Scales matchup. But that's going to be the end of the Affinity deck. 6-0, moving into round 7. This is where the pressure starts to build. I start to tell my friends and family about how well I'm doing, but trying to keep a level head, and I think I don't get tired and start making misplays until about round 9, which would be the first round of the playoffs. Not to say I'm playing perfectly, but I definitely, I think, make more misplays as the tournament goes on. We're up against Lurrus. Like I said in the last video, we probably have to assume that a Lurrus deck is a Grixis Shadow deck, although we also want to consider the possibility of Hammer Time, which is actually a worse matchup for us according to the data I've collected. It never feels like a bad matchup, but in actuality, I've lost a lot more games to Hammer Time than I have to Grixis Shadow. Anyway, this hand seems great against Shadow, and generally good, but obviously not going to be as strong against Hammer Time as it is against Shadow. And opponent opens up with Marsh Flats, which I think is going to indicate Hammer Time to us. We draw Ancient Stirrings, which we decide to cast, maybe to find another green mana, or a Walking Ballista, which is going to pair well with this Hardened Scales and this Ozolith. Opponent is playing Hammer Time. They open up with a Pure Steel Paladin, and one thing we might do here is just play the Hardened Scales and ping the Paladin to death immediately with Ballista. Instead, we decide to leave up the threat of activation of the Ballista, and that way we don't have to commit to killing the Pure Steel Paladin unless they play an equipment. As it is, they play 2 Sigarda's Aids, but no equipments, and this is going to be pretty bad for them because we can activate Arcbound Ravager next turn with the Ozolith in play, resulting in a very big Walking Ballista to kill their Pure Steel Paladin. And I think you'll find that one of the few ways that we can consistently beat a Hammer Time deck is by making a big Walking Ballista, because once that Ballista is big enough, they're just not going to be able to play anything because we can kill it in response to equipments they play. But of course, this Walking Ballista is actually big enough to kill them, right? Anything more than a 10-10 Walking Ballista, or a 9-9 in this case since they're at 18, is going to be lethal. So we're moving on. It feels good to win the first game in a match against Hammer Time because I think we do get better options post-board. Like I said in my deck tech, a lot of my sideboard choices were for Hammer Time specifically, having all of the artifact removal spells. And this matchup is pretty easy to board for. We board out 2 Ancient Stirrings and 2 Welding Jars and the 4 Esper Sentinels in exchange for Pithing Needle, which can name Colossus Hammer, and the 7 removal spells for their various artifacts and creatures. Opponent is going to be on the play, but as you saw from the results, it's not going to end up mattering. Opponent leads on Memnite. Oh, and this opening hand seems decent. We'd really rather have a Pithing Needle. Oh, we're auto-playing again. A Pithing Needle or a Walking Ballista here, or maybe some removal, but the cards in this hand are just good enough to keep on their own merit. Opponent Thought Seizes are Arcbound Ravager, and Prismatic Endings are Zabaz the Glimmerwasp. Honestly, as a Hammer Time player, I think it's going to be incorrect to board in Thoughtseize, or at least to board in too many Thoughtseizes and Prismatic Endings. I really do think that the Hammer Time deck is the aggressor in this matchup, which is why the Hardened Scales deck should board in so many interactive spells, but the Hammer Time deck, especially on the play, wants to be as aggressive as possible. To try and get in before the Hardened Scales player can do something like build a lethal Walking Ballista. Hammer Time player is going to draw a card off of Shadowspear with this Pure Steel Paladin, and we're going to crack the Urza Saga for a Pithing Needle, naming Colossus Hammer, because I'm really not so scared of Shadowspear as long as the opponent doesn't have any Colossus Hammers. However, with Pithing Needle in play, they can still be drawing cards off of this Pure Steel Paladin. So if they do find a way to remove the Pithing Needle and they have a Colossus Hammer or two, we're probably dead. Stoneforged Mystic is going to draw our opponent a Colossus Hammer, which is going to draw them a card off of Pure Steel Paladin, which they're going to equip, but not attack, because obviously we'd be blocking here to try and kill their Pure Steel. We do get another counter on the Hangarback Walker, and a Zabaz in play. We're going to hold this Hangarback Walker in order to activate the other one. But if this Hangarback Walker dies, we can obviously play the other one and then put the counter from Ozolith on it to make a lot of tokens very quickly. And we have Zabaz as a sack outlet, since Spire of Industry is adding a red source here, which I think is incredibly valuable. That's why I'm playing the full 4 Spire of Industries, because when you don't have an Arcbound Ravager in play, for example, when your opponent Thoughtseizes it, the red ability from Zabaz is just so powerful. Opponent still unable to attack into our 3/3 Hangarback Walker, about to be 3/3. And we are going to activate Zabaz in order to put the modular ability from Arcbound Worker on our Hangarback Walker, with the plan of just making a lethal amount of 1/1 Thopters if our opponent finds themselves unable to kill us. We get another Zabaz off of Urza Saga. This is one of my favorite tricks, especially with the Ozolith in play, to get a lot of counters in play quickly, because the Legend Rule off of the Legend Rule will put Zabaz directly into the graveyard, but it will still trigger modular. So now with a 8/8 Hangarback Walker, we are going to be getting a large number of Thopter tokens and a 11/11 Zabaz with flying, which I am going to attack with to try and put our opponent dead next turn if they don't draw something good and fast. It looks like they don't. Obviously, we could have been dead there if they just had Prismatic Ending for the Pithing Needle, or if they had just saved Prismatic Ending for this Pithing Needle. But I decided if they did have a removal spell, they would have used it already, which they did, in fact. And that it was better to try and go for the kill than to wait around for them to draw anymore. And it looks like it paid off. So that's a 2-0 win against Hammer Time, and we are 7-0 in the challenge. On to round 8. We do win the die roll. Our opponent reveals Lurrus of the Dream Den. A lot of Lurruses, as you would expect. And this hand seems great. We've got Welding Jar to protect our Hangarback Walker, and Hardened Scales to make it very large, very fast. And of course Ancient Stirrings, which is honestly one of the most powerful cards in our deck, since it's just as powerful as whatever card is in the top 5 cards, right? It's almost strictly better than any colorless card for its ability to find the right colorless card for the right situation. On the condition, of course, that you have enough green mana in play to make good use of it. In this case, it's going to just replace this Hangarback Walker that our opponent Inquisitions. We could have taken Arcbound Ravager or Esper Sentinel here. Both of those are pretty good options, but I think Hangarback is going to be the best, the most powerful thing we can do with a Hardened Scales already in play against what is shaping up to be the Grixis Shadow match. It being Respect the Cat, I actually happen to know they're not on Grixis Shadow, but I didn't know that at the time. Opponent plays DRC and Thoughtseize, but with this Stomping Ground, we actually know that this is Jund Saga, not Grixis Shadow. And another Thoughtseize takes our other Hangarback, but we do draw a third Hangarback, which is why I comment about the Thoughtseize bug. Hangarback is going to be pretty good in this matchup. Opponent does Abrupt Decay our Hardened Scales, which I think is an indication that they probably have more removal in hand for our Hangarback Walker as well. The deck does have a lot of removal, so it's probably a safe bet that they have some removal at some point. This Pyrite Spellbomb, it might make sense to actually activate the Hangarback Walker in response, but they just decide to cycle the Spellbomb immediately, and they do have Inquisition for our Lurrus, which is pretty sad for us. So I'm just hoping that we can make something happen with this 3/3 Hangarback Walker. Wrenn 6 is going to be pretty annoying for its ability to ping down our 1/1s. But we haven't seen an Urza Saga from the Jund Saga deck just yet. So there are more powerful things they could be doing. And this is actually, I think, where the replay ends. Nope. I know there was a point at which I disconnected from the tournament due to shoddy internet, but for some reason the next button was just not going. Weird. Try something wrong with my replay. No, I just gotta mash the next button a lot. What's going on here? Anyway, we do attack our opponent down to 5, so it's looking pretty precarious for them, especially with this 1/1 Ballista in play. But they definitely have some cards that they can use to stop us. We do decide to regenerate our Ballista in response to the Wrenn 6 activation, because I think this Ballista, I'm hoping this Ballista will just be lethal. They have another Wrenn 6 and a Tarmogoyf in order to block our Hangarback Walker. The Hangarback Walker with the Ozolith here is actually lethal. But we do let it die. After they block with Tarmogoyf, we do let it die because hopefully these 5 counters and these 5 1/1s will be able to close out the game here. But our life total is getting pretty low as well. We do decide to block both of their creatures here. And with just 2 Thopters in play, 1 removal spell is going to win our opponent the game, but they only have 1 card in hand. And it looks like we do connect with a 6/6 Thopter, winning the first game of round 7. Sorry, was that round 8? Oh, right, we were 7-0. Winning the first game of round 8. So this is actually the final match before the top 8. We're already locked for top 8 at this point, but I'm really hoping to go into the top 8 with an 8-0 record. Let's see. Our sideboard plan for this round against Jund Lurrus, Jund Saga, obviously they are playing Lurrus, was actually to board out Arcbound Worker, Zabaz, and 2 Walking Ballistas in exchange for the 2 Relics of Progenitus, the Shadowspear, and the Pithing Needle. I think you actually don't want Shadowspear in this matchup. I would definitely have kept in one of the Ballistas or the Zabaz over the Shadowspear. I think you definitely do want the Relics and the Pithing Needle. Pithing Needle particularly naming Engineered Explosives, which can be quite deadly to us. But I'm not 100% sure what you're supposed to board out in this matchup. Anyway, it's definitely not 4 good creatures, which you want as many creatures, as many threats as you can, really, in these grindy matchups. Opponent opens right up with Inquisition of Kozilek. This double Esper Sentinel hand, I think, is going to be pretty hard to find it not working out against Jund Saga, since Esper Sentinel is just so good in these grindy matchups. But we also don't have green mana for this Ancient Stirrings. Oh my god, that was an entire turn. Wait, stop it. I seem to have mashed the next turn button a few times there. So yeah, sorry to skip through all that so quickly. But what happened there was we played our Esper Sentinel and our Zabaz, and our opponent had Terminate and Unholy Heat. We did end up cracking a Relic of Progenitus there, exiling all of the cards that have been played so far. But as you'd expect to happen, the opponent, the Jund Saga opponent, with so much removal in their deck, did thin out our hand pretty quickly, and we drew another Ancient Stirrings. So now with a Welding Jar in play, no green mana for these 2 Ancient Stirrings, and our opponent going off with an Urza Saga, the namesake of their deck, we are actually suddenly quite far behind. We did draw a green mana to cast Ancient Stirrings, so we effectively drawing 2 cards here. Find a Hangarback Walker off Ancient Stirrings. That's not bad. It's going to help us grind here a little bit, but our opponent does have another removal spell and the ability to make a couple of constructs here. If they have a Wrenn and 6, we might just be dead. Instead, they have a Terminate, killing our Hangarback Walker, and 2 3/3 Ballistas, with, of course, the Lurruses still in the Companion Zone. Come on, MTGO. What's going on here? Alright, we draw a Welding Jar for the turn. Not a great draw. It's great when you have a Hangarback Walker in play. Not great when all you have is a Thopter token. We are going to play our Ancient Stirrings here to try and find some more gas, and we do find a Saga. And, of course, we do get to put Lurrus in hand before our opponent. They crack their Bauble, looking for a discard spell, of course, and I honestly think if they don't find a discard spell here, we probably win. They put their Lurrus in their hand as well, so now it's a battle of the Lurruses. We decide not to make a construct instead of getting our Lurrus down here, which is a bit debatable. And our opponent is now drawing a card every turn off of their Lurrus. So with our life total getting so low and no way to get their Lurrus off the board, even though we have a decent board here, we're just not going to be able to pull ahead unless we draw an Arcbound Ravager or something to go with, to execute some kind of combo kill. And with our opponent having Fatal Push for our lifelinking construct, it's not going to kill us because we did have the Welding Jar, but it is going to stop us from gaining the life. And now there's nothing we can do to stop our opponent's Lurrus. They are going to be able to keep making constructs and get back this Wrenn and 6. So we're going on to game 3 of match 8. And I think we do try out a different sideboard plan here. Or not, actually. We decide to keep the Shadowspear in the deck. Honestly, I'm not sure about this choice. Let me know in the comments what you think. But we do board out a couple of Ancient Stirrings for a couple of Nature's Claims, so that hopefully we can kill our opponent's Urza Sagas with Nature's Claim. Honestly, I definitely wouldn't do that again. I think Prismatic Ending is going to be better than Nature's Claim, if anything here, because it exiles. And if we do Nature's Claim our opponent's Urza Saga, they can always get it back with Wrenn and 6. This opening hand has double Nature's Claim, so if the sideboard plan was gonna pay off, this is the time to do it, right? And I guess we'll have to see if it does. But like I said, we're already locked for top 8, so it's not so bad even if we do lose this. This is our one match that we get for free this tournament because we haven't lost a match so far. And Esper Sentinel plus double Welding Jar is generally really hard for Jund Saga to beat, just because we're taxing everything they play. And they rely so heavily on removal spells in order to stop us. But with two Nature's Claims in hand, we're really not doing anything either. So our opponent really has no obligation to stop us until we get a threat in play. I honestly think if these Nature's Claims were just Zabaz and a Arcbound Worker, our opponent would be forced to play removal spells into this Esper Sentinel. Or maybe they wouldn't even be able to, because we'd be able to respond with a Zabaz activation using the Spire of Industry. So our sideboard plan really coming back to bite us here. We do get to kill an Urza Saga with one of these Nature's Claims and put Lurrus in hand here. Our opponent's pretty tight on mana since we did get to kill one of their lands. We did get to effectively strip mine them. But we're now way behind on board with our opponent's 4/5 Tarmogoyf. We do name Wrenn 6 with Pithing Needle because our opponent has Urza Saga in the board. I think we're pretty afraid of Wrenn 6 here. Wow, this is just taking a lot of clicking. Is it my computer? Or is it MTGO? Relic of Progenitus is kind of interesting here. But it does exile our graveyard, which is going to prevent us from getting any value off of Lurrus. We do decide to cycle the Relic, and all we draw is a land. With our opponent having 3 lands in play, and still no decent threats in our hand, or even in our graveyard, our opponent is starting to draw out of this Esper Sentinel start that we got. Zabaz is decent though. It can pump up the Esper Sentinel in response to a removal spell to at least guarantee that we draw a card off of it. And we do spend our Welding Jar in order to regenerate it. So now we're definitely going to be drawing cards off this Esper Sentinel, and we can start replaying stuff with Lurrus since we have these 2 Spire of Industries in play as white sources. So yeah, at this point, I'd say it's pretty 50-50. I'm feeling good. Our opponent does have 5 cards in hand, but we have lots of lands and this big Esper Sentinel. Our opponent has Kolaghan's Command in response to a Welding Jar here, killing our Sentinel and our Lurrus. So if I was feeling good about the game before, I'm definitely not feeling good about it now. Nature's Claim and Shadowspear just rotting on board here, not doing anything. I'm wishing so badly that those were threats at this point. And our opponent says they thought they were screwed when I had all that in play, but now that I have nothing in play, they're feeling pretty good. Respect the Cat asks if I'm 7-0, which I am, so even if I lose this, we might see each other in the playoffs. Hangarback Walker is going to allow us to stay alive here. Opponent responds that I'm dead if my last card isn't Veil. My last card is actually Nature's Claim, which is going to allow me to gain 4 life. And I do have a 4/4 life-linking Hangarback Walker here, but Terminate is going to do it for us, since we no longer have a big creature to gain us life with this Shadowspear, and we're forced to chump block with everything that we have left. This one Thopter is not going to be able to do anything. And our draw for the turn is Razorverge Thicket, sealing the deal. So that was our first loss of the tournament in round 8. Started off 7-0, and now 7-1 going into the top 8. I actually 5-0'd a league the night before. So that was the end of a 12-round win streak. But we still get to make top 8. So there's going to be at least 2, if not 3 more exciting rounds. And I'm really looking forward to trying to take back our honor from Respect the Cat if we do end up seeing them in the top 8. Alright, I'm feeling really good about my chances going into the top 8 here. My deck just feels busted, but the fatigue is starting to get to me. I post grudge match in the chat. I misread the standings and thought I was actually playing against Respect the Cat again, hoping to get a rematch against Jun Saga. I didn't notice that their companion was actually Kahira, not Lurrus, until a couple turns into the match. But it turns out we are not against Jun Saga. Kahira probably means we're up against Blue-White X Control. And I explain all this to my opponent in the chat. Anyway, this opening hand is actually great, even against Kahira. The double Hardened Scales and the Ozolith are really going to allow us to accrue value. Even if our opponent wipes the board, we can be threatening to kill them out of nowhere for basically the entire game, unless they find a way to remove these 1-drops. They do have Prismatic Ending for the first Hardened Scales of the match, but luckily we have a second one and an Ozolith to back it up. Opponent shocks with Steam Vents. They're representing Counterspell here, and I decided to just cast Welding Jar and put Lurrus in hand rather than play into a Counterspell. I think playing slow against Blue-White Control usually pays off. If you can double spell, for example, casting Ballista and Ravager in the same turn, you can really put them on the back foot, and hopefully you can threaten to be killing them every turn as soon as they let their guard down. Opponent has Dress Down, which is a lot worse for us than Counterspell here. Not only does it draw them a card, but it prevents us from casting Arcbound Ravager as a follow-up to Walking Ballista. So my double spell plan is off the table for now, but if we draw a land, we can do it again with Lurrus and Ravager. And that's exactly what happens. Urza Saga is probably our best draw here. We bait with the Lurrus, which our opponent has to counterspell. Honestly, I think it might have been correct to bait with the Ravager instead, but it's not going to end up mattering because our opponent had Dress Down and Lurrus, or Dress Down and Counterspell. So now we're relying pretty much exclusively on the Urza Saga in order to win us this game, and with our opponent on 5 cards in hand and 5 lands in play, I'm not feeling nearly as good about it as I was just a turn ago. Dress Down is a really brutal card against us. However, Urza Saga does have a lot of power, especially the ability to make constructs at instant speed. Our opponent does ice our Saga, but we can still make a construct in response. And it looks like our opponent doesn't have a way to remove this construct just yet. We do make a construct end of turn because we're trying to accumulate as much value as we can without actually committing threats from our hand. Our opponent's going to have to deal with what we have in play and then deal with what we have in hand. They do have Solitude to exile our construct, which is pretty powerful. And we decide to play a Hangarback Walker here. Welding Jar can protect this board from Supreme Verdict. And a lot of the cards that we have in play, or at least 2 of them, have dies triggers, so we're not too worried about Supreme Verdict. Another Solitude is going to be pretty good here, but at least we have the Ozolith protecting us, and we are going to Welding Jar our Zabaz to keep it alive against a fire. We do land a big Hangarback Walker here, and we are going to get to put counters on it with the Ozolith. Our opponent decides to trade both of their Solitudes for this Construct token, and I make a pretty bad mistake here. I thought I could save the Construct token by killing Zabaz with its own ability, but I forgot that Zabaz leaving the battlefield actually shrinks the Construct token. So even though we've got a 4/4 Construct and we're putting 3 counters on it, it's now a 3/3 Construct, and with only 6 toughness, it's still going to die to these 2 Solitudes. So it's possible that with a Zabaz in play, we'd be able to win some lines here that we wouldn't have won otherwise. A 7/7 Esper Sentinel is obviously going to be strong against a Blue-White Control opponent, but unfortunately they have Archmage's Charm, another card that's pretty brutal against us. And they are going to get to block the Hangarback Walker with the Esper Sentinel. We had to play the Sentinel pre-combat so that we could put Ozolith counters on it, but now it's our opponent with the 7/7 Esper Sentinel, and at 21 life, we are not even really threatening them. they are going to put Kahira in hand and play Supreme Verdict. So now all we have is a 7/7 Inkmoth Nexus with which to win the game. Opponent has some trouble tapping their mana, but they do end up landing a Teferi and a Kahira in the end. We are going to be able to attack the Teferi to death if we want. Wow, Counterspell, what a great draw for them there. But we decide to attack face instead. I think threatening lethal here is going to be our best bet. And opponent, however, they do get to attack with Colonnade and then untap it with Teferi, or at least untap enough lands in order to chump block with their Colonnade here. And with Kahira attacking, Hall of the Storm Gods attacking next turn, and Branchloft Pathway for our draw, we now have no way to stop them from killing us using the damage from their various utility lands. So that was game one against Blue-White-Red Control. Doesn't feel great. Doesn't feel great to be losing game one because I know our opponent's going to be able to bring in more sideboard cards than we are. However, I still feel generally pretty good about this matchup, and every hate card that our opponent brings in dilutes their deck of removal spells and interaction. So our game plan is actually going to be to not sideboard anything except for a single copy of Pithing Needle in exchange for a single copy of Welding Jar, and just try and execute our game plan, the same plan A as we have in the main deck, as efficiently as possible while our opponent durdles around. We are on the play here, and this hand is actually excellent. It's got Inkmoth Nexus, which is a real powerhouse in this matchup, and obviously turn 1 Hardened Scales is going to go a long way to making the hand good. If our opponent has Prismatic Ending here, it would be pretty painful because this hand doesn't have any of the real powerhouses of the deck for these grindy matchups like Esper Sentinel. But it looks like our opponent does not have the Prismatic Ending for our Hardened Scales. And we draw another Hardened Scales. We're going to grab an Ozolith here too. So now we can start making very large Arcbound creatures and keeping the counters around even if they leave the battlefield. Opponent ices us, so we only have the mana to play a 2/2 Arcbound Worker here. And Rest in Peace is going to turn off our modular triggers, but Arcbound Ravager is actually still good even with Rest in Peace in play, because you know the Blue-White Control opponent is going to try and remove your creatures from the battlefield eventually. They really don't have an option. And Arcbound Ravager just allows you to get value out of every creature that leaves the battlefield and put so many counters on the Ozolith. At this point, even though our opponent is starting to pull ahead on cards and lands, all they can do is block with a Shark token, which is going to end up being a chump block due to Arcbound Ravager's ability combined with multiple Hardened Scales and the Ozolith. We are still pulling ahead on board here. With a Walking Ballista in play, we limit our opponent's options even more. And the Ozolith ability is going to resolve. So now even if our opponent has a way to deal with our what we have on board, we have enough +1/+1 counters to turn this Inkmoth Nexus into a lethal attacker. We can't really do anything with Arcbound Ravager due to the Rest in Peace, but we can also ping our opponent down to 10 life with this Ballista, which is going to be lethal if they don't have anything they can do here. So we're really forcing their hand. They have Solitude, which is going to allow them to deal with this Ravager, but it is going to put a bunch of counters on the Ozolith, and they're still going to be taking 10 from the Walking Ballista, or 5 from the combat damage, plus an effective 5 life due to the counters already on it. And we get to keep reloading on threats with the Ozolith still in play. So here, we're trying to figure out exactly what we have to play around. But casting the Walking Ballista really allows to play around a lot of what they have, because if this Ozolith ability is allowed to resolve targeting this Walking Ballista, then our opponent is just dead to the Walking Ballistas we have on board. And even if they have a way to deal with those, they'll be dead to the combat damage that we have on board. And our opponent decides not to show us what they have in hand, but apparently it's not enough. And that's going to be game 2 against Blue-White X Control. We're going to be on the draw for game 3. But like I said, I'm feeling pretty good about our sideboard plan, or lack thereof, basically, for the Blue-White Control matchup. This deck basically comes pre-boarded for Blue-White X Control. And as you saw there, it wasn't even that bad that our opponent played Rest in Peace. Obviously, it did slow us down, but the problem with Rest in Peace is it doesn't trade for any of our threats. And our opponent is going to die to combat damage eventually. Chalice of the Void on 1 here is obviously pretty powerful against a deck with so many 1-drops. It's blanking this Zabaz in hand. But we already got the Hardened Scales down before their turn 2, even though our opponent was on the play. And with Walking Ballista, Hangarback Walker, and Urza Saga in hand, there's just so much that we can do, even after our opponent has landed the Chalice of the Void on 1. So I'm not saying the card isn't good against us, just like Rest in Peace, right? The card, you're obviously supposed to board it in, or if you're main decking Chalice, to keep it in as the Blue-White Control player. But Hardened Scales is just so capable of winning despite these cards, right? It's not that we're playing around them so much as our deck is just powerful enough to do its thing, even against hate cards like Karn Liberated, or not Liberated, Karn Great Creator, Chalice on 1, Rest in Peace, Stony Silence. We just have so many angles of attack. Combat damage, especially with 7/7 construct tokens, being one of our more powerful options here. This is a lethal attack here, again forcing our opponent's hand, and this time our opponent actually only has 4 cards in hand to the 4 that we have in hand. So I'm feeling really good about our chances here. Our opponent's chump blocking with a Shark, which is not going to be good enough. And Memory Deluge costs 4 mana, so I find it unlikely that anything they play there is going to be able to save them at this point, and it's not. So that was game 3 against Blue-White X Control. We are moving on to the semifinals, having won the quarterfinals without sideboarding except for 1 card in games 2 and 3. All right, round 10, the semifinals. This is now further than I've ever made it in a challenge. And this is the real grudge match against Respect the Cat, the Jund Saga player who beat us in round 8 of the tournament. And in fact, Respect the Cat went on to top 8 the Sunday challenge as well. They're a really good, really consistent MTGO player. But since you already know I make it to the finals in this tournament, obviously I don't feel too bad about this matchup, and I'm really excited, really stoked to be able to regain my honor, to reconquer this opponent who beat me in round 8. I'm like Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender. My honor. Okay. 2 Urza Sagas. You know what? You know what's good against Jund Saga? Urza's Saga. You know what card is better than Urza's Saga? 2 Urza's Sagas. I think that's all you need to say about this hand. Respect the Cat does open up with a Ragavan. And we are going to respond with a Arcbound Worker and a Welding Jar, which will allow us to block the Ragavan. But our opponent has Wrenn and 6 to ping it down. I'm honestly not 100% sure if regenerating the Arcbound Worker here was the right call, since it's going to be tapped and our opponent's going to connect with Ragavan anyway. It's possible that we should have saved the Welding Jar for a more impactful card in the future. We still don't have a green mana for this Ancient Stirrings, but I think Urza Saga is going to be pretty powerful here. We decide to play the Inkmoth Nexus instead. I think because it can help us attack Renin 6 to death here. And we also decide to trade the Walking Ballista for our opponent's Ragavan. All of these plays are a little bit questionable, but it looks like our opponent has a pretty slow draw since we haven't seen an Urza Saga from them, and they're already putting Lurrus in hand. Another Ancient Stirrings is a pretty bad draw because we don't have any green mana, but fortunately, our opponent is gonna Inquisition us and find only uncastable cards. Was it a misplay to not put Lurrus in hand here? Maybe, but it paid off anyway because our opponent was unable to Inquisition our Lurrus out of our hand. Opponent does get their Lurrus in play though, and they get to start drawing 2 cards a turn with Mishra's Bauble. So we're definitely behind here, starting to feel the pressure. I think this is a good time to talk about the power level of Lurrus in this deck. I've seen it said that Lurrus doesn't feel as good in this deck as it does in the grindier decks like Jund Saga and Grixis Shadow. I actually think it's the opposite. I think Lurrus is more powerful in this deck than in a grindy deck. But not because it wins you more games. In fact, the grindy matchups are some of our worst matchups because removal spells like Unholy Heat and just grindy cards in general do disrupt our game plan. But it's those matchups when you're down on cards that Lurrus is actually the most powerful. So even though you might lose those matchups more often, it might feel like every time you cast Lurrus, you lose the game. But that's actually because the matchup is bad, not because the card is bad. You know, if your opponent has 4 removal spells and you have 3 creatures in play, having a Lurrus isn't going to make a difference. But it's those games when your opponent has 3 removal spells and you have 3 creatures in play that Lurrus will single-handedly win you the game. And I think you'll find that the games you do win with Lurrus, you really just couldn't possibly have won with any other card, maybe in all of Magic, short of like Ancestral Recall. It really is that good. And the thing is, there's no 3-drops you even want to be playing in this deck. You're already playing white mana, so especially in the green-white version, there's nothing I'd rather play over Lurrus. Despite all that, we are starting to fall further and further behind, in part due to the power level of our opponent's Lurrus. They do hit a Hangarback Walker off the top of our deck, which they are going to end up playing. And they're continuing to pull ahead with Renin 6 and Lurrus generating card advantage. We're now down to 13 life, continuing to make constructs. However, we have a plan here, which is Ozolith, Ravager, and Inkmoth Nexus. If we ever find a green mana, this Hardened Scales is going to allow us to combo kill our opponent out of nowhere, even though they're pretty strongly pressuring our life total and such. Our opponent is going to ping our Arcbound Ravager, and we're going to attempt to save it by sacrificing the construct. They're going to keep drawing cards with their Lurrus, of course, and they do have a second Renin 6, which is going to allow them to ping the Arcbound Ravager again. So now we have to decide if we want to sacrifice the Ozolith to save the Arcbound Ravager, or just let Renin 6 put the Arcbound Ravager counters on the Ozolith. And it looks like we do decide to just let the counters go to the Ozolith. Obviously, we're not going to allow modular counters to go on my opponent's Hangarback Walker. So we're falling yet even further behind. Our opponent has so many cards on the board. They've got a Ragavan in hand, which they're now dashing. But our draw for the turn is Zabaz. And our Urza Saga is going to trigger again next turn. So as long as we can survive at above 0 life here, I think we have a pretty good chance of making a 10-10 Inkmoth Nexus. However, this is going to rely on our opponent not having a single removal spell for Inkmoth Nexus, which I find unlikely given the sheer number of cards they've drawn this turn, or this game. They've got Inquisition. They've been drawing so many cards off of Mishra's Bauble. We do make a construct to block here. And Our opponent pings the construct to death. They cast the Ragavan, and they're planning to make a construct out of Urza Saga this turn, but they're also representing Kolaghan's Command or any other removal spells. They've got plenty of mana and 3 cards in hand. However, at this point I am dead on board, so I have to go for the Inkmoth Nexus plan here. The thing is, I don't have any sack outlets in my deck. I could Urza Saga into another Zabaz, which is going to put at least 4 counters from Zabaz on Inkmoth Nexus. But 4 counters from Zabaz plus 3 counters from the Ozolith is not going to be lethal. So we actually need a sack outlet off the top here. Red mana to activate Zabaz is going to do it. And Arcbound Ravager to sacrifice Zabaz would also win us the game. That is, of course, still assuming that our opponent hasn't drawn a removal spell. So our chances are still pretty slim here. Our draw for the turn is going to be Walking Ballista, which is not any of the cards I mentioned before. But a thought occurs to me. See if you see the line. Pause, see if you can figure out the line from here. Turns out Walking Ballista is kind of like an Arcbound Ravager. Let's see what happens. Urza Saga triggers. I'll just click play. Come on, MTGO. Urza Saga triggers. We tap Urza Saga for mana. We activate the Inkmoth Nexus. Urza Saga is going to get a Zabaz, which is going to allow us to kill one of our Zabazes and put the counters on Inkmoth Nexus. But we actually decide to keep... oh, battery's running low. I'll fix that in a sec. We actually decide to keep the 1/1 Zabaz, whereas usually you would keep the larger Zabaz so that you can then sacrifice it and get more counters. The difference is that the 1/1 Zabaz can actually be killed by our own Walking Ballista for the exact right 10 power Inkmoth Nexus to win us the game. Respect the Cat is not too happy about this. Obviously, we got pretty lucky to even find this line. And they didn't draw a single removal spell in... I don't know, probably 10 cards that they drew with all of those Mishra's Baubles. But we did win game 1 against Jund Saga on the rematch. Now let's go on to game 2 of the semifinals right after I plug in my computer. All right, game 2. This is the last game we get to play against Jund Saga this tournament. And the plan for this last match, for this last game, is 4 Ancient Stirrings are boarded out, plus 1 Arcbound Worker and 1 Welding Jar. We're boarding in the 3 Prismatic Endings, and the 2 Relics of Progenitus, and that's it. Basically trying to fight our opponent's Lurrus and Renin 6 plan. On the draw, I think I like the Prismatic Endings. I might actually board them back out for Jar, Worker, Ancient Stirrings on the play. But I think this is a much more reasonable sideboard plan than what I was showing off before against Jund Saga. All right, so our opening hand has the Prismatic Ending. It's got the Hardened Scales and the Saga and the Zabaz and the Ravager. It's hard to imagine a better opening hand other than Esper Sentinel plus Welding Jar. And our opponent doesn't have a turn 1 play, doesn't even have a Thoughtseize for us. We're going to get our Hangarback Walker down here. It's always good to get Hangarback Walker down as soon as possible, especially when you have Hardened Scales in play, because you can start growing it. Our opponent does have a removal spell for it. It would have been nice to get this Ozolith in play, but of course that wasn't in our hand last turn, so we didn't know. We're just going to play the Ozolith and the Arcbound Ravager, which are both really powerful when we have Hardened Scales in play, and our opponent does not, or at least didn't have a Fatal Push last turn. They did draw a Fatal Push, and we're just going to go ahead and let the Fatal Push resolve. They do have Kolaghan's Command, unfortunately, which is going to wipe our board, but now they're down to just 1 card, and we still have threats in play. This Urza Saga is about to trigger its 3rd chapter. And with a Construct token in play, a 2/2 Zabaz, Zabaz for the draw, and Prismatic Ending, which is honestly pretty close to being able to exile our opponent's Lurrus. It's looking like there's not much our opponent can do here. They put Lurrus in hand and they play Pyrite Spellbomb, which is powerful, of course, but it's just not as good as what we've got going on board, and they're going to have to draw at least like another Kolaghan's Command in order to come back from this. We play our other Zabaz to try and get a decent amount of counters going. Opponent decides not to Pyrite Spellbomb in response. Not sure why, honestly. Oh, because we could save the 1/1 Thopter with Pendelhaven. So another instance where Pendelhaven arguably might have even won us this game, or definitely contributed. Opponent cycles their Pyrite Spellbomb and then plays Lurrus, but at this point there's nothing they can do. They replay the Pyrite Spellbomb, and they're just dead to this 5/5 Flying Thopter unless they have Fatal Push or some such card. Wow, this is a lot of clicking. All right, I'm attacking with the 5/5 Flying Thopter. They do have Fatal Push. I decide to exile the Spellbomb, since it will allow our opponents to it will allow our opponent to kill what we've got in play here. And of course, since it's exiled, they can't replay it with Lurrus, so that stops us from drawing more cards. Our opponent's last play is Alpine Moon, and our draw is Prismatic Ending. Wow, what are the odds? I know we were winning even before we drew the Prismatic Ending, but this is honestly just too perfect, because the turn they play Alpine Moon, they also give us the rainbow mana that we need in order to Prismatic Ending their Lurrus. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. Our opponent has Unholy Heat, killing our Construct. But now, actually, we still haven't quite killed them here. They can block our Esper Sentinel and go to 1, but we have our own Lurrus. So even if they were to survive at 1 life, we would start replaying cards like Hangarback Walker next turn, or Arcbound Ravager. Opponent's draw is Tarmogoyf. That's not going to be good enough since we have 3 lethal attackers here. Respect the Cat says good luck in the finals. GG's Respect the Cat. You played really well, probably better than me, honestly. And I think Jund Saga is slightly favored, at least slightly, possibly pretty well favored. But Jund Saga is definitely the favored deck in this matchup. We did get lucky. But there were a few sick plays, and I'm pretty proud of how this turned out, getting to beat Jund Saga on the rematch. Now we are heading on to the finals, where it all ends. Round 11 of Saturday's Modern Challenge. I happen to know that Sokos is playing Grixis Shadow. They have top 8'd, or actually they got a 1st place and an 11th place with Grixis Shadow in the Modern Challenges just in the last month. So I'd say the odds are extremely likely that they're on Shadow. And they do reveal Lurrus, which all but confirms it for me. This opening hand has an Esper Sentinel, which is generally pretty good against Jund Saga, but we don't have the white mana for it, so I decide to open up with an Ancient Strength to try and go find that white mana. Unfortunately, we don't, so we are going to take Urza's Saga here. And opponent starts right on off with Kroxa. I decide to discard my Esper Sentinel since I still don't have any white mana for it. And our opponent seems to have enough mana to probably be able to play around it. I'm honestly not sure if that was the right call. Maybe we should have discarded the Arcbound Worker, but they quickly Unholy Heat the Worker too, so maybe it wouldn't have made a difference. They now have a 1/1 Death Shadow in play, which is only going to get bigger. They do put Lurrus in hand when we make a construct, so it's possible that our opponent doesn't have too much going on, but it's possible that they'd rather just save their interaction for after I have to commit to a line, which is really smart. I think actually when you're playing against Hardened Scales, like when you're playing against Infect or any other aggro combo deck, you really want to wait until you're dead on board and then interact with your opponent at the very last possible minute. At least try and force them to go all in, to commit to a combo kill plan. And at this point, with opponent bringing Kroxa back from the yard, we are facing down a pretty quick clock. We do have these two Arcbound Ravagers and the Inkmoth Nexus, so we could try and go for the kill here, especially with the Ozolith and the Arcbound Ravagers. And our opponent's only at 9, so actually life total damage is going to be just as effective as infect damage here. So what we decide to do is make a big Arcbound Ravager and force the chump block with the Kroxa. And this way, our opponent has to lose the Kroxa, and we're still threatening to kill them at any moment using this Walking Ballista. We can sacrifice the Ozolith, making an 8/8 Arcbound Ravager, which will make a 9/9 Walking Ballista with our opponent at 9 life. So maybe the correct thing to do here is just to hold up the threat of killing them and force our opponent to respond. But actually what we decide to do is just go for the kill before they untap, thinking that maybe if they had a removal spell, they would have played it already. Turns out they did have a removal spell, and we've just sacrificed our whole board in order to not win the game. And this is going to cause us to lose the game. The question of, is this a misplay, I think is a question for the philosophers, because our opponent was winning or was likely to win if we didn't go for the kill there, since they did have Lurrus in play and more cards in hand than us. And we had no way of knowing whether or not they did have the Unholy Heat. It was really just a table read, and I read the situation wrong. So let me know if you would have gone for the kill there. But in my experience, it is generally correct to just go for the kill when you have it, especially in leagues where players are much less likely to sandbag their removal like that. I think you'll find that usually players will actually have the removal spell a lot less often than you think, because there's a good chance that they're just representing a removal spell that they don't have. But in this case, Sokos did have the removal spell, and they did win the game, in part because I went all in on that play there. And they probably are going to bring in engineered explosives and possibly additional copies of Dress Down. So I think our matchup is going to get even worse for game 2. At this point, I'm feeling a little bit tilted. I'm feeling exhausted from playing Magic for almost 9 hours. So I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100% sure how this game, or even whether I play well at all this game. But Esper Sentinel does make for good opening hands against the Saga deck. I mean the Shadow deck. So I'm hoping that we can maybe just keep this thing in play for as long as we need to. And we do have a Welding Jar in order to save it. But I think I make a misplay here by just attacking with the Esper Sentinel, which allows them to trade the DRC for the Welding Jar, which is in turn going to allow them to kill the Sentinel without even letting us draw a card. I'm pretty confident. Even though DRC is such a powerful card, I think Esper Sentinel is an even more powerful card in this matchup, especially with our ability to put counters on it using Zabaz plus Spire of Industry for red mana. So, I think you can pretty safely blame the loss of this game on that one attack, which is not to say that we would have won if we hadn't attacked there. Since we obviously... since we have a pretty strong board here and our opponent manages to win anyway, the only way they can win is through good draws like Dress Down. And yeah, Dress Down plus a bunch of removal spells is going to be sufficient to wipe our board. So even though we had a lot of good stuff in play there, Esper Sentinel would not have been able to stop the combination of Dress Down and removal spells. All it would have done would be maybe to draw us a card. Even though we have Lurrus of the Dream Den in play now, or in our hand now, our opponent has the counterspell for it. They even have the removal spell with their last card in hand. And now they've got a Lurrus in play, and we don't even have the mana to Prismatic Ending it. So this was a pretty close game, and it's possible that we only made one significant misplay, but that was enough to cost us the finals. Opponent, we do manage to clear their Lurrus, so even in this position where our opponent has wiped our board twice now, it's possible for us to draw out of this if we just draw better than them. But their top card is Expressive Iteration, which is going to seal the deal. With DRC and Mishra's Bauble, they're just going to be able to start surveilling good cards to the top of their deck a lot faster than we can draw them. Our draw for the turn is going to be a land. And that's going to do it. Opponent continues to draw threats, and we continue to draw blanks. I mean, Walking Ballista is not a blank, but it's definitely not good enough here. And they even get to kill it with Engineered Explosives. So at this point, I decide to go out in style and ping myself to death with the Walking Ballista. Good game, Sokos. Sokos is a phenomenal Death Shadow player. Probably the best player in the MTGO meta, at least in Modern, given their tournament finishes recently. I don't feel bad about losing this at all, even if I did make a few misplays along the way. And honestly, my takeaways are just that Hardened Scales is a busted deck. I feel like I had so much room to improve, especially with sideboarding and mulligan decisions. There's just so much to learn. And even at my level, which is not the highest level you can reach with Hardened Scales, I feel like I'm winning games I don't deserve to win. I feel like my deck is just more powerful than a significant number of decks in the meta. You get a lot of free wins against aggro decks and even control decks that just can't out-grind you when you have so many grindy cards and so many potential combo finishes. This deck is honestly just insane. I mean, like, your ability to play through hate cards, your ability to, stop your opponent's nut draws and even race them, right? We outraced a Tron player just by, attacking them. We killed them through Karn Great Creator. Hardened Scales is just a busted deck, and I really hope that everyone who watches this is either already playing it or will consider trying it out, because it's so much fun to play. And I hope you like what I've been doing with this content. If you want to see more, remember to like and subscribe. And as I said in my last video, if this video or a combination of these two videos gets 100 likes, maybe, just maybe, I'll do some live gameplay with live commentary, so you don't have to hear me clicking through these replays frantically and complaining about the replay engine. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you guys get to see me again in a challenge soon, especially a challenge where the results are actually posted. That would be ideal. Again, thanks for watching.